Martin, Simon, and I have slightly different. In fact, me versus the others have slightly different views on how important the competition is, and I've been converted by them, so I've changed my views on this slightly. However, one thing I think we can all be agreed on, because the evidence shows that there is a significant correlation between the amount of research that consultancies do on both their competition and on their niche, and the growth and profitability. Now, growth might not be important to you if you want to stay as a solo consultant, and that's fine, but profitability should be important to you. This comes from Hinge University's survey. The other thing that's important when talking about the competition is that it may not be who you think it is. So this is another piece of research by Hinge where they asked consultancies who they thought their competitors were, and then they asked the clients of the consultancies who they thought their competitors were. And these are the average figures that were given. So you can see that there was only a slight overlap between the competitors that were mentioned. So it's always worth talking to your competitors, especially if talking to your clients, and even people who you have failed to get work from, in terms of how you were different to the competition and why you didn't get it. So studying the competition is important for lots of reasons. Not least because they might be charging a lot more from you, as we'll discuss in pricing. If you're a standard consultancy, you should think about pricing towards the top of the market, top of the competition, not an outlier, but certainly towards the top. It can tell you what their unique value proposition is and how close it is to yours. It might prompt you to look at different services or markets that you could tap. And also, if you're quite clever, if you're internet savvy, you can look at what search terms your competition is paying in order to send traffic to their sites. So, and I guess, sorry, Simon, go on.
Yeah, just a reflection. I know you set it up in terms of the shift in your views, but what I'm enjoying about the tone here is you're encouraging us to have peripheral vision, to be reflective and curious about competition. But I've seen too many car crashes where a budding consulting firm has been incredibly thorough and diligent about competitor analysis, and it's been a real distraction from the main job of going out there and winning a client.
Okay.
So nothing you've shown I've disagreed with. It is all wholesome, and I think it encourages peripheral vision, but that doesn't distract. But the key thing is, go get some clients, go and deliver some value.
Yeah, I would agree. I guess this possibly applies to firms that are growing. And even within those, there's a very successful firm called Elixir that recently floated on the AIM market. And I've been in contact with them since they were quite small. And certainly their CEO, Steve Newton, would always say, stop talking nonsense and get out and sell. And they're doing pretty well out of it. So you have good company there. In terms of if you wanted to do a competitor analysis, in fact, one of our past students, Deborah, recently sent me her competitor analysis, and it was useful not in sort of setting her strategy, but very useful in giving her ideas of how she might sell. And what really set her apart from the others. So asking people who the competition are and how the fees compare. And also there are tools out there that you can, if you're really into it, you can do sort of a media analysis of paid ads, keywords, similar companies and all the rest of it. But if you're a solo practitioner, it's probably not necessary. So there's a workbook exercise around that that you can do, and really to re-emphasize, what your unique value proposition is. So I changed this slide after talking to Martin and Simon, and I was talking about they loved the pictures but didn't love the pictures, and Martin was saying quite rightly that if you're the only person fishing in a lake, then you've got to be wondering why you're the only person fishing in that lake. So having no competitors can be a challenge. My retort to this was really to think about competing on the how you do what you do, as opposed to the what. So, your methods, your culture, your value proposition, what makes you unique.
I think that's a really nice distinction, actually, and I think this is where things like Dragon's Den as a television program probably does as bad for business as the likes of The Apprentice does to young people. I think when it comes to consulting, the fact that there are other firms out there doing exactly what you're doing is evidence that there's a demand for the thing that you want to do. So I'd always, it doesn't mean to say that you can't be the only person, but I'd always caution, a lot of people think they've got a really unique idea. It's execution of ideas that's valuable. So your clarification there, I think is really key.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Good. Okay. Barriers to entry. Now, I put this in because it was quite interesting in terms of a lot of the interviews I did. So I've done a whole load of interviews around founders that started their firm, grew it, and sold it. And I never thought about barriers of entry existing in consultancy because, to be a consultant, you just put your hand up and say, I'm a consultant. It was interesting that some of them did talk about barriers of entry. They mentioned 4 things. One is doing something that was hard. So there was one firm that, specialized in sort of, management advice on concrete in sort of engineering supply chain usage. And they were saying their argument was that, if you're doing advice on marketing ice cream, anyone and their dog can do that. But if you're doing what we do, it's pretty unique. Now, again, going back to Martin's point, I'm not sure that holds because I'm sure that people that do branding for ice cream possibly get paid a lot more than he was getting paid, but he seemed to enjoy the work. The other barrier of entry is creating intellectual property. And by that, I specifically mean branded package solutions. We'll talk more about that later. Client relationship management. So if you're a buyer, you're constantly getting, emails, calls, attention from other people. If you manage that account well, if you keep the relationship going, if you send them content that's useful to them, it's going to allow you to occupy more of their headspace, which means there's less space for competitors to get in and nudge you out the way. And finally, something that we'll get onto when Martin has his section, which is really the digital communication of your expertise. So it's one thing to be an expert, to dominate a niche, but it's another thing to communicate that well. And the two aren't necessarily the same, as we'll see in future sessions. Okay, so this section is on rediscovering your clients. We're going to go back to the basics. In fact, this is the next 2 slides are Martin's that I stole from him. But I really liked them because I typically, when I think about why clients use consultants, I come up with a long list of things. But Martin simplified it quite significantly, which is that people buy for one of 2 reasons. They buy to move closer to pleasure or to move further away from pain. And I like that because it covers a whole host of potential reasons why people might use consultants, but in quite simplistic terms. And funnily enough, I was listening to a podcast about this, guys, yesterday, a brilliant podcast between Jordan Peterson, the sort of psychologist, and the guy who wrote, got the book here somewhere. There we go, this guy, John Gray, and they were talking about exactly this, that why people are more motivated by loss than gain, and their argument is that, if you lose absolutely, is pretty fatal. If the ultimate pain is death, and so we're pre-programmed to avoid that at any cost. Whereas with pleasure, there's only so much pleasure you can have. There's only so much cake you can eat, or sex you can have, or whatever. Whereas from an evolutionary perspective, death is pretty final. So their argument is that we've evolved to be like that.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was a great podcast, by the way. So this is just sort of some research I found around, what clients use consultants for, and it gives you an indication. The reason I wanted to put it there is what has happened right at the top. Digital and technology, I can't even say it, advisory has really come from being quite low in 20 years ago to dominating consulting now. So if there's, I'm not saying that you should move into that niche, but I'm just letting you know that the market is fluid. There's a section in the workbook around your client challenges, and I've kind of broken this down into two sections, and these are the big trends that affect the market. Global warming or climate change or volatility or COVID or new technology or whatever. These are the big things. They affect everyone, but they affect different markets and different sectors in different ways. But also there's micro trends with that specific business that may not apply to other people. So this might be around your specific buyer and their needs, whether they've got promoted or they've got a new budget or they've got a new challenge, or gaps in what they're doing, or potential aspirations. And these can very often be worked out from press releases or financial figures or annual reports or things like that. What I've asked you to do in the workbook is to speak to 10 clients around their challenges in your area. I would also urge you to look at some good publications to see what's happening generally in the sector and what the cutting edge research is. And I've mentioned 4 publications here that I think are particularly good at identifying and sometimes creating client needs. That's Harvard Business Review, the McKinsey Quarterly, Sloan Management Review, and Strategy Plus Business. And certainly if I was entering a new niche, this would drive a lot of my thought leadership, because this is sort of cutting edge stuff on what clients really need and the challenges that they're faced. What are the industry reports? And see, this type of stuff could actually be done really well by an MBA student. So if you're near a university, do contact their master's courses. And it might be a master's in management, a master's in IT, or an MBA, and perhaps ask if there's possibilities for them to help you out with this type of stuff. Simon?
Yeah, I know that there are 4 great publications, and I know this is an endless list, but I would also offer the FT and the Economist and throw those 2 into the mix as well. And I know it's geographically nuanced, but I think we can augment, and those will be 2 I'd willingly supplement.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Economist. And the FT is always churning out good reports. Good. And finally, how can you anticipate these through services or thought leadership? So it's worth doing your research. This is something that Martin put together for me very kindly, which is really looking at what triggers the client challenges and where they come from. And this should help you hone both your marketing, but also your thoughts around the challenges that you are seeking to solve. So do they require a specific skill set or represent a common challenge, impact a specific role holder, occur due to a specific event, merger and acquisition, new technology, change, recession, economic boom, or whatever. There's a series of questions, and it's really just to help you delve a lot more deeply into thinking about what challenges your clients are facing, and this in turn should impact your strategy and the way you think about your services and what you're offering. Okay, and finally, under strategy, we're going to have a couple of slides on your business models. And this isn't nowhere near as big as I'd be talking to if I was talking to a firm that was growing. Because if you're an independent consultant, perhaps you want to stay that way, and so there aren't a vast amount of options for the business model. I'm going to have 2 slides on this. So the first thing I would say is that the startup consultancy is very different from an established consultancy. When you're starting up, you're anxious, you're worried about how you're going to pay the mortgage. You will get tempted off into different directions. Perhaps you don't know what your niche is yet. You're still experimenting, and you will very often burn the midnight oil in order to get the cases and testimonials that will allow you to further demonstrate your products and services and build your credibility. And that's fantastic. You'll spend a lot of your time hunting. But as the firm becomes more established, as you get more of a reputation, as you focus down more closely on your niche, you can focus more on being a more professional, systematic firm. So hopefully you'll be doing more farming in terms of, we'll talk about these distinctions when we come to sales, but farming is sort of, growing your clients, reusing them, retilling the soil, and keep, I don't want to use the word fertilizing, not when it comes to clients, but also nourishing your clients. Thank you. Focusing on your margins and your efficiency, and really improving the systems around marketing and all the rest of it. So I'd say that's the first shift I would notice. I'd also say that even for the independent consultant, there are business model options, and we'll talk more about these later on. But the first is using associates, and most small consultancies either use associates as part of their network, or are associates as part of another network, and that can help. That can help you get bigger projects. It can help you gain knowledge. It can help you if you're not particularly good at sales and someone's better at sales and can get you in. So it can solve all types of problems. Certainly, if you're thinking of growing a firm, the shift from associates to employees is something that doesn't need to be absolute, but needs to be there if you're thinking of selling the firm at some point. So that leads us on to the second point, which is around growing the firm. This I've done a vast amount of work on, and there's a whole host of options available to you. However, what a good firm looks like is pretty much the same regardless of where you are on the spectrum of size, in terms of, they're looking for margins, looking for good revenue, looking for stable clients that are repeating, and to have systems and processes that build the assets of the firm, so that you've got the value of the firm in its systems, thought leadership, processes, methodologies, etc., rather than all up here. Because all up here can be quite stressful, even if you're just one person. And the final business model is around partnering. And this is really to look sort of adjacent to you, but look horizontally in the market, but also look vertically in the market, to look at what other organizations are there that don't compete with you directly, but you might act as a useful conduit for clients for them, and vice versa. And if you can find firms like that, they can be an absolute godsend. I've spoken to several very successful firms that have established very strong partnerships, and some firms have actually ended up merging, so that they offer the whole suite of services, either horizontally or vertically. Okay, so we are at the end of the strategy session. Quick summary of what I went through. The client market is shifting to high value and low value, and it's important to think about how you can get into a high value one. You want to be focusing on a profitable niche and how you accumulate your expertise and build your reputation off the back of that. Compete on how. So if you find yourself in a crowded market, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but in your unique value proposition, you should be thinking about what distinguishes you in terms of how you do the work and how you communicate that as well. Researching the competition, I would argue, is important, not necessarily to make sure you do something else, but to ensure that you price yourself appropriately, that you've got the right unique value proposition, and that you're hitting as many profitable services and markets as you possibly can. And finally, I would stress the importance of researching the client challenges yearly. So if you go through the workbook and do the exercises that I've suggested, hopefully you'll be ticking all those boxes.
Thank you. I just want to draw attention to three things you've shared and to bring a thread through them. And first is the word sustainable, and that came in that early definition. Then you showed us the lovely road, the new slide, with the temptations going off to the side. And then you've shown us the word yearly. And the point I wish to make here is that our encouragement is we spend a wee bit of time in the workbook and we answer the questions, and it helps us crystallize our strategic direction. That is not the end of the story. because it is a sustainable journey yearly. This will move and this will change as our experience and as the market changes. So I think my concluding point of this is strategy is a process, is a dynamic, is something you do. And we might all get enthusiastic about just being reflective now. Is that importance to be continually reflective and see our strategy emerging over time with our experience and being able to cope with shifts in the market itself. So it's almost like we would need like 12 sections of the workbook, each one of those a repeat of the like blank pages that we can continue to complete. So it's the process dimension I just wanted to just drop anchor on.
Yep. And actually, the research I've done around, which firms are successful in COVID, it exactly speaks to what you're talking about, is that those that pivoted quickest and communicated that pivoting the fastest were those that did best out of COVID.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Okay. So looking forward, we will be leaving core and moving on to manage, where I believe Simon will be picking up on the foundation stage first of all. But I hope you've enjoyed the session on strategy and look forward to speaking to you when we get to the manage quadrant. Take care. Bye-bye.